Hey,
Hi.
Hey,
how's everybody?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Gosh, y'all are actually together. I'm so jealous.
we figured it'd be a little easier just to do some of it in the same room.
Yeah, totally.
So.
I haven't seen our office in 2 years, basically. I went back once or twice, and now my desk setup is so old that my new computer won't connect to it, so I can't even use it. So I'm just I guess I'll stay home for a while. So
Gosh,
pros and cons, I guess.
crazy.
Well, we just wanted to quickly introduce ourselves, and like Via said, thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah.
I'll start off. I'm Emily Uvaney. I'm an international business marketing major.
I'm Keli Carpenter. I'm a marketing major.
I'm Via Bruffett. I'm a marketing major as well.
And I'm Abigail Cobb. I'm also a marketing major.
Nice. I was also international business marketing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so our first question, we know that you currently work at Amazon in Seattle. Could you describe what your current role is at Amazon?
Yeah, I've had a lot of roles at Amazon. But currently I run our in-stock team, which is effectively inventory planning for pet products. So all things related to pets, dog food, cat food, litter, crates, toys, leashes, all of that. I'm responsible for making sure that we have the inventory in-house in order to sell it.
Okay, awesome. And then how did you initially get involved at Amazon?
So I was working at Tyson Foods. I did my internship there when I was in school. Worked for a couple of years right outside of undergrad. And then I had a moment where they were asking me to reevaluate the shape of the Fun Nugget and whether or not that should go from dinos to insert something else. And I was like, good question, I guess, but not really what I'm interested in doing. So I started exploring other things, and I came across Amazon, actually because my roommate at the time had purchased something off of Amazon. She mentioned how cool it was. And, 9-10 years ago, Amazon wasn't that big of a deal. Whereas now I would say probably everybody has an Amazon account in some way, shape, or form. So I had applied on a books job, which is effectively working with publishers. I just like reading. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. Maybe I could, instead of working with, retail accounts like I was doing at Tyson Foods, maybe I could go work with publishing houses. I think I must have applied in October or even earlier and didn't hear anything back until right around Christmas. But that's kind of how I found Amazon. And ironically enough, my skip level boss, which just means my boss's boss, was also a U of A graduate.
So, oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Small world. I think there were 4 of us from Arkansas at the time, and he happened to be on my team, which was fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and you said you worked at Amazon in a bunch of different departments. So did you have a favorite department?
It depends on the time of year. So I had some really cool jobs. I think the one that's probably most memorable is when I was working on a project called Culinary Innovations, which was effectively for Amazon Fresh. We wanted to create new products that were effectively surprise and delight for customers. You go into a Whole Foods, or here we have a PCC. I don't know what the local fancier grocery store in the area is now, but there's kind of a reason to go back, right? They have that front of store where there's seasonal or local products, and you just don't really have that, or we didn't have that at the time. And so my job was literally to go out and find and create these cool products. So a lot of my trips were to farms, which was a lot of fun. One of my pictures for work is me holding a little piglet from one of our farm trips to North Carolina. So that one was a lot of fun. I started a brand from the ground up and launched a series of products that go with it. And it's still live today. It's probably not as big as I'd like it to be, but we also acquired Whole Foods Market while I was doing this. So it was a very it was a period of change. So it made it a really difficult role, but it was also probably one that was the most memorable by far. But I've also worked, I mean, I liked reading so much. So working with publishing houses was pretty cool. I got to read everything before it got published, which was a lot of fun. And then I also worked with arts, crafts, and sewing, and those vendors, they're all just so happy to craft and show you what their stuff can make. And so it's all very lighthearted, versus some of the other businesses where maybe it's just really like down to business. So I don't know, there's been a lot of good ones. And of course I like mine now. I mean, who doesn't want to work with puppies, right? Like,
Exactly.
I'll keep the puppies happy. I don't have any pets of my own right now, but when we are in the office, I just like get everybody else's puppies to come hang out. We do have dogs in the office.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Emily, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, no, thank you for opening that up though. It's really interesting to hear about your progression over the 9 years. Right, is it 9 or so years that you've?
Yeah, 9 years at Amazon.
Okay, that's
Almost
awesome.
the day. I've got 3 more days, I think, and then it's mine.
Congrats.
That's
awesome.
So close. We have badge colors at Amazon that kind of mark your tenure. And so you get a yellow badge when you get 5 years, and you get a red badge when you hit 10. My husband just hit a red badge and he's like, I'm just like, I'm so close, only one more year.
You're coming up on it.
We'll get there.
That's awesome. So then kind of transitioning sort of in relation to the article, but just in general, COVID, all the things. How have you personally dealt with supply chain delays, either last year, this year, the year prior? If you've dealt with any, how could you describe any of that?
That's literally all day, every day for all people doing inventory management. Typically, and this is, pre-pandemic, inventory planning is very much about how do you optimize things. A lot more around establishing efficiencies and making sure that you're streamlining as much as you possibly can. COVID hits, throws everything to smithereens, and basically says, try again. And so now we're having to be much more flexible with our approach, which is really challenging because typically, I'd been able to say like, okay, marketing team, or okay, finance, or okay, buying team, whomever it is, here are the plans and what we think demand is going to look like over the next insert however long you want your forecast to be. And now it's just so much harder, right? Like theoretically, pets eat the same food of the same amount every single day, right? Like there shouldn't be a lot of fluctuations, but when inventory is so sporadic and showing up, like the vendor can send us X amount today, and then there's nothing. And then there's another amount that shows up later, and then there's nothing. Then your demand curves start to look really odd when they should be pretty stable. And so there's a lot more interaction with teams where maybe I'd have, an occasional planning session with, where now it's daily, weekly cadence. And that's inclusive of marketing, right? Like they can't push demand on something that we don't have to sell. So there's a lot more engagement there, but it's also a lot more, I would say, compassion between retailers and vendors, just from the sense of everybody's going through the same frustration where, previously we'd be trying to optimize our own businesses. And now it's like, how are we working together? How do we make this as good as it possibly can be? Knowing that, if a factory in China shuts down for a week because of COVID, there's nothing I can do for that, right? Like I can't fix that. But what I can do is figure out how to be as flexible and nimble as possible here. And effectively have a bunch of like backstops in place, which just is totally not what you're planning to do if you go into supply chain, right? Like it's the opposite of what you go to school for. So it's been really interesting in that regard, but I do think it makes it a lot more engaging to come to work every day because I'm not going to lie, every now and then you just walk in and you're like, well, that's not what I was planning on doing today, but I guess that's what we're working on. So it has been a very interesting few years. And I was on the vendor management team when the pandemic started. And I actually had bath products was one of mine. And so soap dispensers, all of a sudden it was like, how do we make sure people can find soap dispensers, right? Like that's important. I'm sure every business who's, capable of producing literally anything related to PPE was in the same boat. So it's been very different. But as far as, supply chain disruptions during the pandemic, it's pretty much ongoing. And also all these things that we're doing from corrective measures standpoint, because they're such aggressive levers that we're pulling, we cause some other downstream impact down the road that we're going to have to solve for. So there's a lot more of this like trade-off assessment of saying like, okay, well, I can do X, but in 3 months, I'm going to have to deal with this other problem that we don't normally have to deal with. So it's very interesting. It's really hard.
Yeah.
But I love it. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I enjoy my job a lot, which is good. I will say it definitely takes, you have to acknowledge the fact that like, I'm being measured on how close to right I am, as opposed to how right I am, right? Like nobody's expecting this to be perfect, which is a little bit of a saving grace, so to speak.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So it sounds like you've kind of gotten to do you've had to deal with the dynamic part of it, but you're also getting to the point where maybe you're in a routine of like what to expect for when things get
Yeah.
disrupted. So that's interesting.
Yeah. The playbook, so to speak, has evolved over the last couple of years. And it's, for some vendors where, material shortages are no longer a thing. There are fewer variables for how we need to plan with them versus, we've got folks who not only do they have labor shortages, but they can't find the materials that they need to make the products. And so they have these kind of compounding effects that are impacting their business, which is really hard for everybody involved, but particularly for those vendors.
Great. To switch to the next question, in relation to the article and increasing shipping container costs, how has Amazon dealt with that?
In any way that we can. I would say, and there's specifics that I obviously can't share, but kind of going back to what I was mentioning around figuring out creative ways that they may not be the most scalable efforts, or they might not be something that we think we need to do long term, but in the short term, Amazon has a set of leadership principles, and one of those is customer obsession. And that literally does drive our business all day, every day. And so we will default to, if I can fix this for the customer by pulling this lever, I should probably do that. And obviously there's a lot of trade-offs that go into those decisions, but ultimately we're having to look under, around corners, under the rug, like speaking in every little spot that we probably normally wouldn't consider in order to figure out what works. So it's a lot of trial and error. And what's working for some businesses is not working for others, and vice versa. But on a macro scale, these things don't just happen overnight, right? And so things like, securing additional containers, that's very expensive. There's also literally every other retailer trying to do the same thing. And so it's, rather than saying like, okay, which is the singular strategy that is the most cost efficient, will get us what we need and quickly, we're now having to look at like, okay, can I have 10 different options instead? And maybe that's not the most cost effective way to do that, but it's the way that we can actually get the things that our customers want. So it's different, but it is, I would just say, a lot more willing to kind of test and learn.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay, so in your first email, when you sent the article, you mentioned a term called GSCPI.
Yeah.
And none of us had ever heard of that. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that, give a little definition.
So this came across, and the nerd in me thought to myself, like, wow, that's interesting. But this is effectively, okay, I think it's Global Supply Chain Pressure Index. And effectively what it was, and it's not fully fleshed out yet at this point, but economists are finally kind of taking a swing at trying to say, okay, when all of these supply chain disruptions happen at a global scale, what does that do to your business? Typically you have delays happen every year when we're shipping containers from China to Long Beach, right? Like that's just it's normal. It is not normal to have every container be late or to have the entire port just be sitting with container ships clogging up the port. That has a much more meaningful impact on the economy. And so it was really interesting to see that after a couple of years, there's so much attention on it and so much acknowledgement of like, this is meaningful. It's not little disruption. It has an actual impact on the economy when these things happen. And so it's this effort to try to quantify that impact. Now, it's not actionable at all, right? Like my job is not going to change if the index is one number versus another. But it is really interesting that it's got so much attention in a relatively short amount of time. Like while, us sitting at home quarantined for 2 years definitely feels like an eternity. From a business standpoint, 2 years is a blip on the radar. So to see that economists are kind of taking that lens of saying, this is significant and we should figure out so that we can make predictions on how do we help the economy is really meaningful. So it hasn't been like sorted out, and there's a lot of criticism on it so far. There's a bunch of debate between, I've seen like a Forbes article on it, a couple others who are like, this is about as useful as insert whatever. But it is really interesting to see how much impact and how much influence that these events over the last few years have had, because they're not going to lighten up in the short term. So,
right. This is kind of on a more random note, but
okay.
But last week, before we had a snowstorm recently, but before the snow,
Yes.
we were talking in our class about how more pets have been suffering with anxiety because a lot of their owners are going back to work.
Mm-hmm.
How has that affected the pet department at Amazon?
So this is a super interesting question. It's not just that. Yes, the pet anxiety with their owners going back home. We call them pet parents.
Yeah.
With pet parents going home, going back to work, that is true, right? Like that is a thing. And so folks are trying to make sure that they're basically their babies at home are taken care of and comfy while they're gone. So but it wasn't just that, it was the fact of like how many people got puppies during the pandemic, right? Like there was an absolute step change. And I'm sure that some of your classmates got puppies. Might as well hang out with somebody rather than just yourself. So it's been really interesting to see the reaction between different groups. So if you think about right when everything shut down, like gyms are closed, you couldn't buy a dumbbell. Like they weren't around because everyone was trying to make their own little home gym, right? And so you have this where that's probably a one-time purchase, right? Like I don't know if you got a Peloton that you're going to buy 3 more, right? Like you're probably only going to buy one of those. Whereas when you buy a pet, you have recurring purchases that happen. You got to feed it. If you've got a cat, you need a litter box. There are all these things that generate a step change in demand that isn't going to necessarily go away. And so you've got different business units here being like, okay, do we think that demand is true? Is that step change going to stay there versus which, in my team's case, it probably is. And even if somebody has to, unfortunately give their pet to somebody else, those people also need to feed the animals. So, those pets don't go away, right? Whereas, you probably don't need to buy, 15 different dumbbells. And so that demand probably will go away and you can't plan for that in future years, which is just really meaningful from a standpoint of one, how are we planning space in our warehouses, but also like, what are we going to feature to folks? Like our site is really, it's busy, right? I'm not selling one product type. I'm selling literally everything. We're a mall effectively, right? We're competing with all of the things. So it brings up a lot of discussion around one, what's going to sit around for a long time. And then two, what do people actually need now? And what are they going to continue to need? So there's a lot of discussion on it. We do voice of the customer discussions, which can be a variety of things. And we also do market insights discussions on a weekly basis with our team. And so this has come up a couple times about seeing these kind of swings in product types that are moving as a result of effectively pandemic puppies. I'm sure kittens too, but pandemic puppies just has a better ring to it.
Yes.
Sure.
And then I know we're coming up on our time, but Lakey and I were both just wondering, for on a lighter note, what's some advice you would have for us as graduates, and like any hard or soft skills that you've experienced in your role that's beneficial to have, things like that you would give us.
I mean, first of all, enjoy being in college. It's so much fun. Like, I love it. I would totally do it all over again. I had a great time. All of my best friends were from college, and we're all now have kids. I think the last girl from like the core group had her baby a couple weeks ago. And so now everybody's a mom. But it's really cool to, like, the people that you meet in college are the people that you're going to have relationships for years. And so I would say, like, really enjoy it. I know it's been a rough couple of years. Like, I can't imagine going to school during a pandemic, like, dear Lord. So enjoy it as much as you can. But I would say, as far as like your question on skills, like, be a sponge. Like, you guys are about to like start your careers, right? So like, learn everything you possibly can. Don't view everything as a ladder. It's a jungle gym, right? Like, take lateral moves if you need it, if you want to learn a new skill set, because ultimately that will help you move up if that's your objective. But it's true at literally any company. Assume like the best intentions of your peers, and that folks want to help you succeed, and lean on other people, right? Like, soak it all in. It's the easiest way to learn quickly is to assume like, nothing when you first start, right? Absorb as much as you can. It will help you be effective faster. But then, with that humility, as you're learning, like, you bring something really unique to the table, right? Like, I don't think I got hired into this role because I had an extensive supply chain background. I didn't have supply chain background at all. So everybody has like something special that they're going to bring to the table. And so you hear the expression, like, everyone thinks they're a special flower, right? Like, you are, though. So make sure that you just know what makes you a special flower in that sense, because that's what's going to help progress your career. It's going to help you and enable you to kind of make the shifts that you want to make, right? And so there's this balance between the humility of, I probably don't know everything I need to know, and so I'm willing to learn it, but simultaneously having this confidence around, this is my strength, like, this is what I bring to the table, and this is how I'm going to contribute. And mine is very much about being a people person. I absolutely love seeing my team succeed, and I want them to be really successful. And that's kind of what I bring. And like, there are other skills, right? Like, everyone's got the laundry list of things from their resume, but kind of that one thing that makes you special and unique, like, don't let anybody squash it, especially as ladies. So don't let anybody squash that, because y'all are special. So keep that in mind.
Well, Kelly, I just want to thank you so much for chatting with us today. It was really exciting to get to learn from you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Also, super cool project idea. I've never done that. I wish I could have asked somebody a bunch of questions, but if y'all have more after you guys kind of read through everything, let me know.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Have a good one.
You guys